Okay, we're back. I'm re-recording, re-streaming, so I'm just gonna take it kind of from the top here and start back again. So yeah, if you have any other questions, I don't know, like this thing, it just like lost my microphone for some reason. No idea why, but it just did. Okay, so technical difficulties fixed. Um, what I was trying to say was, and maybe you caught kind of like what I had in the stream here, but first thing, so from yesterday's stream, I effectively I noticed how I set up like a zero cost mode so that I could test out this bug that was happening, where when a deck panel section gets destroyed, so I make this deck panel section, and if it gets destroyed, then the problem I was having is this building, this turret which sits on it, was not getting destroyed at when the deck panel gets destroyed. And also this stone resource, like this one per turn amount of resource that I was getting, it didn't go down to zero a turn, because once the deck panel that it's sitting on is destroyed, then it's really no longer your resource anymore. So that basically the thing that I wanted to happen just was not happening. Um, I wanted it to destroy any kind of infrastructure that was sitting on top of the deck panel, and then I also wanted it to remove the stone resource. So I set up a debug mode to try and test that out, and I found out that my game engine was this my logic that I wrote, because it's my game engine that I built. It was actually double freeing the deck panel. So a deck panel, you imagine the game, for each of these like enclosed regions here, right? There's actually an entity called a deck panel that is somewhere in memory that sort of defines that space of what sits on top of it. And so it's got some center point here, and then it's got some width here and some height, right? And my game engine keeps track of all of that. And when one of these post holes gets destroyed, like if an enemy destroys it, then like the thing that we're simulating here is a deck collapsing, right? So that deck panel collapses, and then anything that's sitting on top of it gets destroyed and then is no longer claimed. So this would get destroyed, and then this would no longer be claimed. Um, and basically, my game engine was like double freeing these deck panels, which led to a bunch of problems. So all I did was I put in some logic that was saying like, okay, so whenever one of these gets destroyed, um, we're gonna try and we're gonna figure out what are all the associated things that got affected by that destruction, right? So it's like a system, If this gets destroyed, then the joist that's next to it gets destroyed, and then the deck panel that's sitting on it also gets destroyed. So we keep track of all those entity indices that got destroyed, or entity index that got destroyed, and then we get rid of them all. We free them up so that later on the game engine can reclaim the memory for that stuff. This sort of memory freeing, memory deallocation, I'm not actually doing any of that freeing through the operating system. Au contraire, I have actually allocated all of the memory for the entities upfront. So it's just all my memory. So I'm kind of like managing my own block of memory for this game. And so basically, in my own block of memory, I say, hey, here's a free slot, that we can use for another entity. That's basically what's going on here. So all I did was I fixed it by keeping track of which entity indexes or indices had already been added to the list of things that we're going to get rid of when a deck panel collapses. And then if the same one, like just prevent it from adding the same one twice, right? So just using an array every time you add something in, or just check the entire contents of the array, just to make sure that you don't add the same one in again, right? It's dead simple, but, and you know, not particularly efficient, right? Because you imagine every time you're going to do an insert, you have to like check through all things that have previously been added. But it's okay because um, it's okay because it's always going to be just a really small number of things that were affected anyway. So if we were talking like really large numbers, like hundreds of thousands of entities every time, you know, a post hole gets destroyed, right? Yeah, then there would be some major efficiency problems. But we're really talking about a handful of things that end up getting destroyed. So it's acceptable to have kind of inefficient stuff there. Um, so that's kind of the decision that I made. So basically fixed the bug from yesterday, as you maybe saw as from my previous attempt to doing the stream that kind of didn't really work. So that got fixed. And now I'm kind of turning my attention towards some of the other kinds of design considerations. So we're gonna declare victory there. Um, so one thing too that's kind of cool, because yesterday I talked about okay. Do you defer deletion of entities until the end of frame to prevent use after free kind of stuff? Um, Gosh, that's a good question. I guess I don't at the moment. I don't really have any system that where it's a problem, and I guess the um, I haven't really been running into problems caused by that, and I guess here's why. Um, the reason is if I go into my like entity logic here. Um, so first of all, I've got different kinds of entities, and it's a bit of a what I've done is kind of made like I've made what really fancy object oriented people might call like it's got some kind of polymorphism to it, but not through inheritance necessarily, not strictly through inheritance. So I've just got like regular like base entities, and then so base entity, it's just an array of them, and they just have like a position in space, like um, and then they've got some of these other things that they've got an index handle that calls out to the other more complex kinds of entities, right? So to prevent use after free kind of stuff. I guess so use after free, I would say is a problem if so the way that the way that my entity system frees things up is I think I do like a free list kind of thing. So if I free something up, then so I use this exists flag on entities to say that the slot that this entity is in is free. It can be used. It can be taken up anytime the game engine wants to go and grab a fresh entity, right? And if I took an entity that was previously in use and then I freed it up, then all I do is I have a separate list that I keep track of entity indices which are free, right? And then what I do is I increment the number of free entity indices, and then when it's time to go and get another entity, so I have this other thing called add entity or retrieve from free, right? Depending on, look, like if there's a free slot open, then grab from that slot. Otherwise, just grab from, just kind of allocate, or not allocate, but maybe that's the right way. I mean it differently. Go ahead and grab it from a different slot. So this would be like, Okay, I think about it like you accidentally delete the deck panel first, and it had the handles to the other things that you wanted to delete. Oh, interesting. So I guess what I would say is that the design that I chose is one where the deck panel itself, because I guess I don't really, I don't, in my soul, I don't believe in object-oriented programming. And so I just don't really design my programs that way, which is to say that something like a deck panel, from my perspective as more of a pure procedural type programmer, I look at that as the kind of thing that by design shouldn't have handles to other things that I would want to delete, if that makes sense. So a deck panel would just be some state in memory that just represents the deck panel. So what kind of state might that be? Um, Correct. Yeah, exactly. So the deck panel is completely independent of the things that it depends on, right? Or that depend on it. The deck panel is just some entity in memory. And I have this other kind of mapping. I call it a gameplay state map. And basically what this is for each tile in the world, there's just a structure called gameplay state. There's just a piece of data that says, hey, these are all of the entities that are associated with this tile. So if a deck panel happens to be occupying a specific tile, actually I'll just like run the game so you maybe get a sense. So for example, on this tile right here, I have a post hole, right? And my gameplay state map for this specific tile, I actually wish that I could have like a drawing mode so you could actually see the specific tiles, but you just kind of have to pretend that there are tiles. Like this is a tile, this is a tile, this is a tile. So this tile would have on it a post hole entity index, which is filled, right? And all it does is it's just a lookup into that array of entities, right? So post holes in the game are basic. They're completely independent of any of the other state. It's just what I have instead of this object-oriented like mesh of all these pointers to pointers to pointers. I just have a flat map that just says if you give me a tile location, I'm going to tell you what stuff is on that tile, right? So I'm going to tell you what if there's a deck panel on that tile, right? I'm going to tell you where to find, I'm going to give you an index to it. If there's not a deck panel on that tile, that panel entity index is going to be set to 0. So 0 is a special kind of entity index. It means null. If there's nothing on there, then, that's just set to 0. So similarly with like joists and deck top structure index, entity index, if there is something that is like a turret or a repair bay or something that sits on top of a deck panel, right? Oh yeah, without a doubt. Like Casey Muratori, Jonathan Blow, they are my handmade heroes. Like they taught me so much, and really they just taught me like ways to just kind of peel back a lot of the like kind of untrain myself from this object oriented mindset and just think more about like just remove all of your assumptions and just think more about like what does the program have to do, right? And like let's just let data be data, right? And let's just look at what do I gotta do to solve this problem, and then I can invent my abstractions from there. And so a lot of the ways that I've kind of landed now as a programmer is more of like just a simple procedural style programming where it's like look, there are things that are object-like in the world, but basically they're just data. They're just structures in memory. They're just things that, they occupy some slot in memory, or they represent some state. You know, I have in this game, I've got a world, and it's got a bunch of state in it. And that state can be entities, right? It can be things like deck panels and post holes and whatnot. But it's all of that. You won't find in this code. You won't find anything like a deck panel class, right? That's got pointers to all of the things that it depends on, right? I don't really do things that way. Instead, I just have it's more like there's a world, right? And the deck panel is in that world. It has a position in that world. And then there's like logic that operates on the data that represents that deck panel. There's logic that like looks at the state of that world as represented in this, big like gameplay state map, right? That just does all the mappings between a position in space. And the reason is because as I was working on this, like just solving the problems kind of from the ground up, a lot of what I noticed is, look, most of the time, what I really want is if I'm at this position here on the tile map, right? If I'm looking at like let's say, for example, this post hole gets destroyed, right? This gets destroyed. If I'm here and this gets destroyed, right? What do I really want to do? What I want to figure out is, what are all the things that depend on it that are then also going to have to get destroyed, right? So like, let's say that I put this turret on here and I wanted to, I was going to destroy this. Well, first of all, this post hole's got to get destroyed. Okay, fine. But then from this position here, I want to find out, are there any like attached joists, right? So I can look at the map and I can see which joists are attached to it and I can remove those, right? And then I can also ask the question, is there a deck panel like over here, or maybe over here, or maybe over here, or maybe over here that depends on this post hole, right? And notice how it's not the post hole that I'm interrogating or that I'm interested in. That's kind of what object-oriented programming might make you think. What I'm actually interested in is this is what is at this position, right? I'm moving across the map and I'm asking and I'm querying the map. I'm like, what is here? What is here? What is here? What is here? That's actually what I'm interested in. And so I think what's weird about object-oriented programming is that inverts that in some bizarre way, and it makes it about this thing, when actually it's more just about, I'm traversing this world and I want to get the state at a particular point, and then I want to do something to that state and modify it so that I can, get the expected outcome. So hopefully that kind of that explains it. But yeah, so essentially, at the moment, something like this problem of deleting the deck panel first isn't really much freeing it up first is not so much of a concern for me, because, and it's kind of the case with any entity that's in the game, it's not really a concern for me because none of those things really have handles to other stuff that they depend on. They're sort of like, if it's like a big tree or whatever, they're kind of like the bottom node of things. They're all independent, and then I have procedures that operate on them and create them or destroy them or whatever. But if a deck panel gets removed, it's not the deck panel's responsibility for figuring out what other stuff to remove. Instead, it's the calling procedure, right, that removed the deck panel. That's the thing that has the responsibility of removing all the other stuff that the deck panel depends on. And it's kind of funny because the way I talk about this is not this way of doing things was not something that was completely obvious to me necessarily. It's strange because as I practiced programming in this way more and more and more, it it becomes something that you're more able to articulate. And so that's kind of what I would say to like newer people programming is you don't necessarily have to understand what you're doing so much as you just have to develop a practice of not doing things the object-oriented way. You have to just develop a practice of doing procedural programming. You know, pick whatever language you want, pick C, pick Odin, pick Jai, I don't care. You know, just practice it. And eventually over time, I think it'll become more clear to you why it's better. And you will start to be you'll be more able to articulate what it is that you like about it. I think people, when they enter college, they get kind of brainwashed into object-oriented dogma, and then that's sort of like, that's all the neural connections that they've got in their brain, and now that's the only way that they know how to frame the problems. But if you practice framing the problems a different way, all of a sudden you'll be able to articulate them differently, you'll be able to think about them differently, you'll be able to solve them differently. And so I guess it's just, to me, it's a real tragedy that there's this whole other, like, better mode of problem solving that we're just not even introducing people to, and that they're just not getting practice with, right? Because all the frameworks, they're object oriented, all of the tools are object oriented. It really is. I mean this with like no hesitation in saying it. It's a dogmatic ideology that completely took over our industry, and we are all suffering because of it. Like, I say that without reservation. So, okay, onward. All right, so demonstrated that we can get rid of deck panels just by, so that part of the game works. What I wanted to show you actually was also this other thing that, because remember how I set up that debug mode, and what I was saying yesterday, I set up this zero cost debug mode. So what do I mean by that? In order to kind of solve this problem that we just debugged, notice how everything costs nothing, right? Well, that's because I put in a mode that lets you do that. So I'm gonna turn costs back on. And what's cool is the way that I did it, because it is kind of this procedural sort of programming. There's actually just one place in the code where I set that. And so all I have to do is just turn it off. Let's see, debug, cheap debug mode. So if I just turn on, yeah, here it is. So if I just say this is false and then recompile, we should have costs back on. Okay, so costs are back on. So now we fixed the problem. I guess this is kind of bringing back full circle to what I discussed yesterday, which was, we were playing the game and we had this problem of when a deck panel gets destroyed, the stuff that's sitting on it doesn't necessarily get destroyed. And then we have to, and the resources per turn don't necessarily go away. But we set up like a really quick kind of debug mode to figure out what the problem was, just by making everything cost nothing so we could build as much as we want, set up the test condition, see what happens, and then test the thing. I did most of that work kind of after the stream, but I would say it took me maybe an hour to an hour and a half, and then I had to go and do some cardiac rehab stuff after, because I had this heart procedure. So yeah, like, think about it. It didn't really take that much time to solve our bug here, and we could have spent all this time doing like all these unit tests or setting up this complicated testing infrastructure, and frankly, like, none of that's necessary. All we had to do is just put in like a quick debug mode. So now all of this is back, except I did put this card into the starting hand for test purposes. So I want to take that back out of the starting hand in order to get us kind of back to zero for this. So I'm going to do that. And so this game actually has there's a place where the starting hand, yeah, is it generate starting hand? I can't remember exactly where it is. But I want to get that. Generate starting hand. Okay, yeah. Oh no, that's randomly generate. Oh no, this has it. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So this is basically what I can do is when I want to test this function here, randomly generate starting hand, that will just put certain cards into my hand to begin with. And actually I can change that as well, because this also sets up the starting deck. I kind of want to have repair. This is hand. I want to have the repair bay and the turret, the regular turret, in the player's hand to start. So we're going to do this. Oh wait, hand card, hand count. Okay. And so now that this should have just the regular turret and the regular oh, cheap debug. Whoops. Yeah, I need to have that the cheap debug mode flag as well. Okay. All right, so now I think this is kind of the default starting state that I want to have for the game, at least for now. This gives the player and then, you know, maybe if there's like different player, you imagine that there's like different player characters that you could have. So imagine that there's somebody like, you know, what I've got here is this player character. It's just a dude, right? He's just kind of like your standard like playthrough, but a lot of roguelike deck builders, or just actually just a lot of roguelikes generally, they'll have different characters that maybe they start out with a number of different, you know, pieces of equipment or cards or, you know, that kind of a thing. So this might just be your standard build, where you get the repair bay and you have the turret in your deck, so you get to choose, like maybe on the first turn, I want to put the repair bay down so I can start accumulating repairs. Maybe I want to put put a turret down. So I have these choices. Or maybe I want to start expanding in this direction and get this resource, right? I have that choice. But I like putting these in that starting deck. So maybe on this turn, I'll just this first turn, I'll put the repair bay down. Now I've got 3 energy and I can spend a little bit on post holes, right? And now my turn is up. And then I'm going to have to, you know, defend it. But what I want to do is I want to capture this right away. What I'm learning is it's very important to capture resources early on in the game. Because, okay, and maybe what I want is the fire rate with turret. So that gets shuffled in. I'm finding that the most satisfying way to do to shuffle cards in is to just completely redraw the hand on every defense phase. So I guess the reason that and then it draws up to the number that are in your deck. So if your deck is really, really big, it's going to randomly pull from that, and you might get cards that you might get structures that you want, you might not. That so far is feeling pretty satisfying. So now I know that I will have this. If I can get this many per turn, then great. It's a little bit of a risk, actually, to try and build all the way out here, because I might not be able to necessarily defend it. But I think I'm gonna try and take that risk. And if I do take that risk, I need to be willing to spend. It might be difficult to defend this. Not gonna lie. Yeah, I may have really bitten off more than I can chew here, because my gun barely stretches there. I've noticed that sometimes it's possible to get bad rolls of course, right? That is always going to happen in a game like this. And then it's also possible that you'll end up with, okay, so I don't want any of these. It's very it can happen where you have a bad roll. Okay, now I've got no energy. I really have to defend this over here or I'm screwed. Sometimes the way that the game rolls, sometimes I get enemies that they spawn in locations where they attack parts of the deck that are not defensible. But the unfortunate thing is like that's a big protruding bulge, and so I have to defend it. I got lucky on this game, I notice, and I'm able to defend it. And so now I'm going to start getting this income. And I think at this point I'm going to place down a repair bay. Although I do have a few repairs. I'm actually not going to use my repairs. But I want to use this fire rate width turret. But it's going to take 3 turns to get there, right? So now I've got this kind of gambit where, what do I want to do? I can't really spend much energy. I've got a few different repairs. You know, where do I want to build? I don't really have much energy, so I can wait for the next few turns. And the unfortunate thing is I took this big risk, so I'm going to have to defend my deck. But thankfully I don't have these like big protruding bulges, right? So I'm just trying to figure out like what's the space that I want to defend or what's like easy to defend. What I notice a lot about this game is basically the bigger these, like there is this huge risk reward trade-off. Okay, maybe I can afford to get this because it's just going to get mixed in with these. So then I'm still guaranteed to get this every turn. Maybe I'll repair this one too. Trying to think about. Also, there's this thing of like, it gets a little bit harder to defend if I put a bunch of buildings here. I could fill this up with repair bays. That might not be the worst thing. Just get a lot of repairs. That could help. But I also want to, if it's possible to expand up there, I probably should. That's a pretty close by resource. And if I can get those really, really quickly, I'm gonna try and do it. It's a risk. It's a risk, but because now I'm gonna have to defend this, right? But the benefit is I get that resource. So that it seems possible to defend it. Just maybe a little bit more challenging. So, and you know what? Why am I just mostly like just playing the game a lot and not kind of going straight to the next kind of thing that we could implement? It's because I really believe that the way that you make games great is you play the crap out of your stuff and you pay attention to what you're seeing. You're paying attention to the problems as you're developing. Like I haven't built all of the systems in my game yet. And so I just want to see like what's it like to play it. Is this fun? Am I having a good time? Do I feel like it's a strategic game? Do I feel like it's interesting to play? All of that stuff I'm genuinely curious about. So now this looks like I could build some big like panel area maybe. But I'm wanting to get more of these resources here and fill that out. I still have plenty of repairs, which is okay. If I put a post hole, yeah, where do I want to expand next is kind of the question. If I expand out here, maybe. Well, the problem is I can't walk to that section, right? Because I've got a building there. So, shoot. Yeah, and I could do some kind of like panel area there. Not so sure I love that. But maybe I'll just do like a larger area. Okay. And again, I'm just playing the game. I'm not doing anything other than that. Because like next turn, let's see. Maybe I can keep these guys away. But I'm noticing other things too. So like the guys, they collide with these rocks, right? Have you noticed that? And so instantly I'm seeing that there's something similar to like what you have in Factorio. So in Factorio, there's this kind of interesting thing that happened. Oh, do I spend that or not? Or do I do this? Oh, that's a problem. So it shouldn't be saying that you can build things on an incomplete deck panel, right? Like, will my game allow me to do this? Yeah, it does. Okay, so that's a problem. That's just a bug. So I'm gonna have to fix that. All that needs to do is just make sure that, because in my game state, there's like a flag that says like whether a deck panel is completed. So if a deck panel is completed, then that's when you should be able to place something on it, right? What we have here is kind of a partially completed joisted section. To complete it, you have to spend 3 energy to like panel it over. So that needs to change. So I'm actually gonna just like write a note about that and end this playthrough. So let's do that. It'll probably be time to. Maybe I can fix this before we go. Shouldn't be able to click on a post hole when in deck panel bullet, so I still have that. Okay, so this, did we fix? I'll just put this in my bug list. Shouldn't be able to place deck top structures on panels which have not been completed yet. So that's a thing that we got to do. Which have not been completed yet. Okay, so you shouldn't be able to place deck top structures on panels which have not been completed yet. This I still think is a problem. This we fixed. This we fixed. This we did not fix. So I played a game for like a really, really long time, and then eventually enemies spawned into the rocks and couldn't be moved towards it. So this bug should be pretty easy to fix, and one of the ways that we fix that is turn back on the debug mode, right? So we had that debug mode that's like the cheap debug mode, that cheat code. Okay, so that's going to be back on to true. It might be nice to show separation, but yeah, I completely agree with you about that. You're right. And that's one of those UX challenges, I think at some point, that becomes a problem that you have to solve. Because it needs to communicate that. And a big problem too is like, as you sort of build this larger and larger deck structure, right? You can imagine that there's deck panels that they're all kind of like mixed in, and so maybe it looks like a large surface area. Actually, just one thing I'll show you that kind of illustrates it, but perhaps not in a great way. So if I put this down, right? One thing that I've got kind of going for me is that the tops of these post holes do show up through. And so here you can sort of tell that that this is a panel, that this is a panel, that this is a panel, and this is a panel, and that they're separate, kind of. And notice if I was to do the same thing, but like with a much larger, so if I was to do this, right, then the inside of it would be clear, right? So that kind of looks like a lone panel. But you're right that visually the distinction is not as clear as it should be. So again, how can I tell the difference between this here and then this here, right? This is like, now there's like, I've got a mode that you can toggle where you can see below and you can just see the structure of it, right? So I can see that structure if I hit F1, but then, you know, as a player, I don't really want to have to be toggling between those different modes, if that makes sense. So this is certainly like one of those, as the game gets higher and higher fidelity graphics. I guess I just think in my mind that it seems to me that this is the kind of problem that an artist could solve, that like a really talented artist could solve. Because here's what I'm imagining. I'm imagining that maybe this deck is kind of like an ad hoc structure, or it maybe looks a little bit like an ad hoc structure. So maybe it sort of has this like cobbled together kind of look. Like maybe this panel here is it's made with like slightly different colored wood or like slightly different type materials, right? And so maybe even here there's options to build that with different materials. And people indeed, they build their decks with different materials. So like, you know, some people build their decks with this kind of like polystyrene, like, you know, like the recycled diapers. I call them diaper decks because they're like they take like recycled baby diapers and then they turn it into like like a polyester kind of deck paneling. And so like maybe one section is like that stuff, right? And then like maybe another section is like fine teak cedar or whatever. And like maybe another section is like, you know, metal or like, you know, I don't know. But it's something that I think an artist should be able to solve in principle. But you're right that it's a problem, that they need to kind of be colored differently. They need kind of like separating lines so that visually I don't have to go into this like other mode, right? I don't have to go into some kind of deck substructure mode. I can just see by looking at it, oh, you know, this is a big panel here, and this panel is this size. And, you know, these panels are each individual, right? I would be able to see it. So is that a problem that I should solve right now? No, because it's very early in the game. It's very early in prototyping, and what I'm trying to figure out is if I have any interesting gameplay. So if this gameplay is interesting, then it's going to be worth investing probably a lot of my own money into hiring an artist who can solve these kinds of problems, right? Who can really help to define the visual look of it and then can use their art skills to solve these problems, right? For the moment, I guess what I'm trying to do is like, I can give the player a way to look at deck panels, right? I can do that part with just a button. So maybe it's something that you can click on like over here. This will just kind of be like the first version of the game, is like, there's like a surface view mode and then like a subsurface view mode. And this already kind of does the job. Like if I do a really, really big panel like this, right, you'll see pretty clearly that it's distinct visually from all the others. Now, the player probably won't be able to place something like this for a lot of reasons, mostly because you can't shoot far enough to defend it. But you can see now, like now that's really clear. Like this, it's really clear, even with just these little like post hole tops sticking through. that it's its own separate panel, and then therefore any bonuses that apply to it. Another thing too, there's other things that you could implement. For example, if a if a building gets a bonus from being on a large panel, then maybe when your mouse hovers over the building, it can just it can like display the number of the bonus number, and then it can also just like highlight the panel that it's sitting on just to show you not only the bonus but kind of where it's coming from. And then there's other visual cues that you can put into the game. So one of them that I put in already is, actually I'll show you, because the enemy, so now like these guys are going to come and they're going to attack my deck, right? Now when this guy attacks this, the whole structure lights up, right? And so what I'm trying to communicate is, hey, this whole deck panel is under threat. And if he destroys that deck panel, right, then, and you're standing on it and it collapses. And also notice these guys, right? So they're, that's one panel, that's that one panel. So basically anytime a thing is under attack, the whole panel lights up, right? And that's just to kind of give you, the player, this clue that like, hey, danger, don't stand here, right? So that's kind of another thing that you can incorporate into it. But I agree that it's actually one of the bigger problems. The only reason that I don't try and solve it right now is mostly because I suspect that better art will solve that problem once I decide to invest money in it. Yeah, so maybe I could just render the joists on top of the panels as a slightly darker shade. Yeah, that's another possibility too, right? So maybe there's some way of taking that, like that information about the joists and some, different shade. I think one of my limitations also is just whenever I'm prototyping. So I use Sprite for my art, and again, I'm not really a good artist. I know a little bit about art, but I'm not an amazing artist. But I just use like one. I try and stick to one color palette, and so I picked this Apollo color palette from I think it's Adam C. Eunice. And so basically everything is in that palette. So all of the colors, they're on palette. It's the same. Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so you understand. And it's tough, like it's tough because the thing is, like, if I could be wrong. Like I could be totally wrong, right? And if I'm wrong, then and I fail to see a very large problem that's like looming on the horizon, then that's going to cost me a lot. It's going to cost me all of the time that I spent prototyping up to that point, right? And like that sucks. So like I very much feel like the concern about, hey, if you foresee that there is this very big like user experience problem or design problem that could totally torpedo the project, if you're really sure that it's not the kind of thing that better art could solve, or that a slightly more sophisticated design could solve, you do need to stop and address it right away. Like, and it can be it can be difficult to figure out which kinds of problems fit into those different categories, right? It can be difficult to figure out what sort of a thing really is a time bomb that if we don't if we don't figure it out right now, it's going to torpedo the project, versus what kind of thing really is just more of like an aesthetic consideration or a slight design consideration. It's like if you could conceive of a solution to the problem that just relies on having better art, which I actually for that particular problem, I can conceive of a solution that just involves better art or like a particular kind of aesthetic style. I imagine kind of like maybe a almost like a post-apocalyptic style where you have different scavenged materials that you're using to build the deck. And so all the different sections are made out of different scavenged materials, and they all look different, right? So if you can think of an art style or a theme that solves your problem, I think then it's okay to say, okay, well, let's, the art style will solve that problem for us. And we don't, let's focus on the game design for now. And when it comes time to visual design, we'll do it. But it can be hard to figure out um, if it really is a problem that you should address right now or if it's something that can wait. Generally, like you said, I try to focus on gameplay first and foremost. If the game itself is not engaging and fun, then nobody's going to give a crap about the art and all the other stuff. So that's the first most important thing to get right. Um, so yeah, I use Sprite and I have like one palette, and it simplifies the early art creation process. But at the very least, like, perhaps I could actually start at some point. And I even did at one point. I kind of recognized that it was a problem, and I tried to do these sprite sheets with where it actually looks like deck paneling with the spacing in between. Um, but then I kind of figured that would be sort of difficult to tile, and then I also sort of thought, gosh, that's really getting into aesthetics kind of too early, right? It's getting into that far before you figured out if you've got a game people want to play. So I kind of stopped going down that path, but I very frequently have to stop myself from like zeroing in on details like that because it's a real distraction from from the process. So, um, well, that's coming up towards the top of the hour. So I guess I'll just stop here, and if you have any other questions about what I'm up to, or questions on game design, that kind of thing, I'd be happy to answer them. All right. Well, have a good afternoon. It's been fun.